All right, welcome back. So today's session is going to be three parts with carbohydrates. This first part, we're just going to focus on the glucose molecule and the formation of a disaccharide. So to do that, there's quite a few terms we're going to go through. I'll try and go through them in the order that it's written, roughly. So first of all, just introduce what glucose is. It's what we call a hexose sugar. And the reason why it's called hexose is because it has 6 different sugar parts. So you've got 1 there, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then the two types of glucose molecule are alpha, so alpha and beta. And they're pretty much the exact same. Everything's in the same place. The only differences are where this hydrogen here is located. So in alpha, you can think of that A as being above, the H is above, and in beta, the H is below, for B for below. So that's something you have to learn to draw. So just to practice making sure you're familiar with that. So glucose, you'll know from GCSE, it's an important molecule for energy. It's what we use in respiration. So it's a really important form of chemical energy that we use. Animals need and plants can produce. It's highly soluble, which means it dissolves in water, and that part of the reason why it's soluble is because of these little hydrogens and these hydroxyl groups that make it be able to interact with the water that it's in. Okay, so they're your two different types of glucose. You have to practice drawing them. So, you've got to make sure you can do that. Let's move on to how an actual disaccharide forms. So a disaccharide is 2 monosaccharides put together. So there's one monosaccharide, glucose monosaccharide, another monosaccharide. If you put 2 together, you're going to get a disaccharide. So I'm going to show you how that happens. So these are 2 alpha glucose, and we can see that because the H is above here, the H is above here, everything else is the same. And for them to become a disaccharide, well, they're going to interact and form a covalent bond. So these 2 hydroxyl groups are going to react together. And you can see there's 2 H's and an O. Well, that makes H2O. So water's been released. And we call this reaction a condensation reaction, just like condensation that happens on glass if you breathe on it. Condensation reaction. And when that happens, well, because these bits have disappeared now, they've gone away to form water, we're just left with this oxygen here. So I'll just draw that in red. You can see now the oxygen gets left behind. We can call this an oxygen bridge. So the oxygen is now, this is a covalent bond, which is holding both these monosaccharides together. So if you look from previously, these numbers 1, 2, 3. So let's number this one here. There's number 1. It's always in the same place. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Numbers the same way again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this oxygen is holding 2 specific carbons together, carbon 1 and carbon 4. So we call this that's right here, a 1,4 glycosidic bond. Okay, so this is in actual fact, if you've got these 2 glucose molecules together, this is a specific disaccharide called maltose. So let's write this one down first, because we need to know these as well. So there's our first disaccharide. If you put glucose or alpha glucose plus alpha glucose, you get maltose. So if you consume maltose, so maltose is something like in lots of food products, you need to digest that. So to digest it and break it back down into its glucose molecules, we need to try and break this bond. So it's the exact opposite to what's just happened. If I want to break that bond, let's just get rid of this. We need to add water to that bond. So if I add water, we're adding 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, and that's going to be enough to separate these two again. And there's our OH, and there's our OH. So we're back to square one. They're both monosaccharides, and we call this type of reaction the hydrolysis reaction. So if you're hydrolyzing something, this is what it means. You're adding water, a water molecule, to break that bond. Okay, so we've talked about hydroxyl groups. They're the paths to the glucose molecules which interact with each other to form a disaccharide. In order to form a disaccharide, a condensation reaction takes place, which is where water, or H2O, is released. Once the condensation reaction has taken place, we get a 1,4 glycosidic bond, and it's a covalent bond, which means that oxygen, if I draw it again, let's just do it so we've got it again. If I was to do this other way around, it's good to always practice anyway. So there they are again, interacting. Water's being produced, condensation. We end up with our oxygen bridge there, and that oxygen is covalently bonding with carbon 4 and covalently bonding with carbon 1. 1,4 glycosidic bonds. All right, some other disaccharides to be aware of. Lactose, you get it in dairy products, and that's made from glucose again, but there's another monosaccharide called galactose. And then, so there's our galactose, our lactose, and then the final disaccharide to be aware of is sucrose. That's plants produce sucrose, which is glucose again. Sorry, I'm writing over this now, never mind. Plus another very sweet monosaccharide called fructose. Fructose is sweeter than glucose. All right, so just a quick reminder, you need to know the differences between an alpha and a beta glucose. The differences are where the hydrogens are located. We need to know how a disaccharide is formed through a condensation reaction, which is when the water is being released. And we need to know that it's the hydroxyl groups which are interacting, these ones here. We need to be also aware how these bonds can be broken, which is by hydrolysis, which is the adding of water. So we've talked about the monosaccharides you've introduced so far are glucose, fructose, there's our galactose, we'll just tick that again. And the disaccharides are lactose, maltose, and sucrose. Right, one last thing, there's our hydrolysis, I'll tick that off. One last thing, one other sugar. So this is the hexose sugars. Just being aware of, in biology, the pentose sugar, which is a pentagon shape. And you just need to be aware of this one. You might recognise from GCSE. This sugar here, we call this a ribose sugar. This is nothing to do with energy now. This is the sugar that's needed. This is a nucleotide I've just drawn. There's a ribose sugar. There's our phosphate group. And this is our nitrogenous base. So when we talk about the different sugars in their monosaccharide form, just being aware there's the hexose sugars of glucose, fructose, galactose, and then just being aware of the pentose sugar called ribose. Right, so The next video, the second part of the carbohydrates, we're going to focus on the polysaccharides, which is many monosaccharides joined together. See you then.